When you talk about castigations, I think the move or the recommendations by the House, is it about 88 pages document that we saw you coming out with? Some say it is the most indicting document that they have seen in recent times, especially with the sale of 3 great banks in the country. And the CBN governor is also on that particular matter saying, well, your panel actually got it wrong with the sale of those 3 banks, which we saw the CBN do last year. How does that affect what we're trying to fix in the country?
Well, when you talk of the sale of the 3 banks to bridge banks and subsequently some banks that were incorporated by the Corporate Affairs Commission, I mean, we are saying simply that it is in breach of Section 44 of the 1999 Constitution and other relevant laws, that you cannot just divest somebody of his property without provision for adequate compensation. Although there were so many theoretical postulations as regards to what divestment is and what compensation is, and whether or not a bridge bank that is encapsulated within the purview of Section 39 of the NDIC Act and then AMCON Act 2, whether or not they do not fall within the exceptions provided for under Section 44 of the 1999 Constitution. But by any canon of interpretation you give, we are saying that these outfits belong to certain individuals. The government cannot come up just overnight and then breach those banks, sell them to AMCON, and from our findings we discovered that there are private individuals that have shares in AMCON, contrary to what we were made to believe, that AMCON is 100% owned by the federal government. Shares belonging held by Federal Ministry of Finance and then CBN. So it gives cause for concern.
You also talked about some kind of forgery. Now that you talk about CBN, that there was some kind of, you found some evidence of forgery and fraudulent misrepresentation involving the CBN governor and other top industry officials in the controversial nationalization of these banks.
Yes, we found out that they said the banks are owned by the federal government, which ought to have been incorporated by NDIC 100%. But we discovered that certain individuals were mentioned. In these 3 banks, you find out that the directors who have shares are the same directors. In our findings, if you go back to our...
Let us get it straight. All 3 banks, Main Street, Keystone, and Enterprise Bank, the same director for all 3 banks?
Yes. That is exactly what we discovered.
It's not a case of similar names.
It is not a case of similar names, but a case of the same people with the same address, being directors in all these 3 banks. So,
is there a law prohibiting that? If the same man can actually be the director and they can manage and salvage that particular institution?
What we are saying is that these companies were incorporated within 3 days. They filed it on Friday, and by Monday it was out. So, which means they worked on Saturday and Sunday. Now, we are saying that this is an enterprise that belongs to all Nigerians, having been taken over by AMCON, which is 100%, 50% to Federal Ministry of Finance, 50% to CBN. Then we are seeing names of some individuals. So what happened? And these are public liability companies that were taken over. Then they were taken over by a limited liability company, a PLC being taken over by a limited liability company, This is fraudulent.
But, you know, what exactly is the issue? Is it the directors who are there? Or is it that they do not represent the interests of Nigerians? Because you are saying that because AMCON has taken over the banks, they belong to Nigerians. Even in institutions that are owned by the government of the day, we also see that it's only normal that they constitute a board of directors.
Yes, board of directors duly constituted and nominated by these institutions. But in this case, private individuals just featured. They just featured as owners of certain shares who ought to have been owned 100% by government.
You know, who would have gone through all of this process? Let's use the cliche now, the due process, to see that due process was followed before your panel found all of this.
Obviously, it is the Corporate Affairs Commission that ought to go through all documentations. SEC2. There are issues of acquisition, mergers, and so on. So SEC ought to have gone through these documents and even give consent. But they just kept mute to all that transpired as at that time.
You also talked about, in that particular the document you released, the report also talked about the CBN not honoring some of your invitation. Was there any particular document you wanted or clarification you wanted from the CBN while you were sitting?
Yes, we wanted the forensic, examination that were made on the 8 failed banks. We wrote the CBN to give us details of those forensic, examination. Now, the CBN governor now wrote to us, telling us that under Section 33 of the CBN Act, that in conducting such kind of examination, there should be confidentiality, and that these are confidential documents that ought not to be released to the National Assembly. And we wrote the governor telling him that under Section 88 and 89 of the 1999 Constitution, we have a right to demand any document. And under the Legislative Houses Powers and Privileges Act, there are exceptions stipulated in documents that might not be released unless and until the consent of the president is obtained or the head of that department is obtained. And those documents were defined as security documents. And by any canon of interpretation, the examination, the reports, the so-called special reports, were not contemplated. They are not within the purview of that definition. And therefore we insisted we wanted that. He now wrote back saying there is a court judgment to that effect which ruled or decided that nobody should interfere and dabble into CBN activities as far as failed banks are concerned, because it is covered by BOFIA and the CBN Act. We'll examine that judgment. It is rather in favor of the National Assembly, because it clearly stipulated that in the decision, it said that, look, issues of this, if anybody feels particularly bad about it, has no option but to go to the National Assembly as a last resort to review the law. So how do we review the law if we do not dig into the activities of these banks and the discoveries made by CBN? What will inform our amending such laws to go in consonance with the yearnings and aspirations of Nigerians? We have to look at this report. And incidentally, these are some of the issues that have been put on hold by the House of Representatives, because the chairman committee on banking and currency came up to say that, look, we have these documents with us.
That's the documents which you requested.
Which we requested.
Okay.
So this portrays to us that there is double standard. If one committee is requesting for a document in the same institution, you are saying that it is confidential and special. You cannot therefore release it. And you have released the same document to another committee. I mean, that is double standard.